Hey guys, good day. Hey, it's been a while since I put a video up. So this thing from John 4 verse 35 has been bouncing around inside of my head now for a few months. I just decided I'll go ahead and put a video together for it. But Jesus talks to his disciples about a saying. Now we have sayings in our country too. We have a saying about this right here.
Time. 1,000 people freezing their butts off waiting to worship a rat. Weatherman Phil Connors.
So Groundhog Day, we have a saying in this country. It says that if Puxatawny Phil sees his shadow, or whatever, there will be 6 more weeks of winter. So we have a saying. And in the Gospel of John, chapter 4, in verse 35, I'm going to show you here a video of that. Jesus says, "Do not you guys have a saying, yet there are yet 4 more months, then comes the harvest." I've read this a million times, and I've looked at this, and I just can't quite figure out what does all this mean. I've looked at the commentaries. It's simply the commentators they don't really say anything about it. It just kind of goes over their head, and I feel like I fall into the answer here. Let's listen to Jesus talk about it a little bit.
To eat. But he answered,
I have food to eat that you know nothing about.
So the disciples started asking among themselves, could somebody have brought him food?
My food is to obey the will of the one who sent me, and to finish the work he gave me to do. You have a saying, 4 more months and then the harvest. But I tell you, take a good look at the fields. The crops are now ripe and ready to be harvested.
So he's obviously referring to this saying, which I have here written. Do not you, that's the Jews, have a saying, there are yet 4 more months, 4 months, then comes the harvest. So this saying, like we have a saying that says, when Puxatawny Phil sees his shadow or whatever, there's 6 more weeks of winter. If you look at the harvest cycle that was in ancient Israel, the middle of April is the time frame for the barley. And that matches really the first fruits festival that's spelled out in Leviticus 23. And we'll look at that in a little bit. So this is the question. What is occurring in ancient Israel 4 months before the harvest begins? This isn't rocket science, guys. So the middle of April, if you subtract 4 months from the middle of April, it lands in the middle of December. And what event is typically occurring in the middle of December for the Jews? It's Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication, the Festival of Lights. So I'm just going to make the statement. I really think that saying is a Hanukkah saying. It was something that they probably would say or would be part of the discussion while they were celebrating Hanukkah. And for whatever reason, Jesus makes the statement, point blank, that the harvest of the end times, which we'll talk about in a little bit, that harvest appears to be occurring 4 months before the first fruits harvest, according to Jesus. Okay, so let's look at this Hanukkah thing here. If we go and look at John chapter 10, we can see that actually Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication, is actually mentioned by Jesus. It's in chapter 10 of the Gospel of John. What's noteworthy in these verses is the word harpazo is mentioned twice. Other than, 1 Thessalonians, the harpazo, the rapture. But Jesus uses the word in a slightly different context. But nevertheless, he speaks about the harpazo, and it comes up in the discussion during the Feast of Dedication with Jesus at the temple. So it goes like this. At the time of the Feast of Dedication, Hanukkah, took place in Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple along the colonnade of Solomon. So the Jews gathered around him and said to him, "How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly." He answered them, "I have told you, but you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name bear witness about me. But you do not believe me because you are not among my sheep." See, the Jews were not part of his sheep. "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them. They follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish. No one will snatch, harpazo them, out of my hand. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch, harpazo, them out of my Father's hand. I and the Father are one. Okay, so what appears to me is this harvest of the end time souls by the mouth of Jesus seems to be occurring in the middle of December. That's his words, not mine. So let's look at the Feast of Dedication. What are the themes of the Feast of Dedication? So guys, if you don't really know about this event, this was a time that the temple was, there was a terrible abomination in 168 BC, sometime in the, I think, in the Kislev, and their Maccabean revolt fought back against the Greeks, this Greek king, Antiochus Epiphanes. So there was a Greek king whose name was Antiochus Epiphanes, and he was the one who did this terrible act, this abomination, in the Jewish temple in Jerusalem in 168 BC. And his name is Antiochus, which sounds a lot like Antichrist. But anyway, the themes about the Feast of Dedication, or the Festival of Lights, or Hanukkah, is lights, number one. And we know that Jesus says, "You are the light of the world." He said, "Let your light so shine before others that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." Then Isaiah prophesied, "Arise and shine, for your light has come. The glory of the Lord has risen upon you." Paul wrote this. He said, "For if anything becomes visible is light. Therefore it says, Awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you." There's also a theme of oil. That was the miracle of Hanukkah with the menorah and the oil lasting 8 days when they only had 1 day's worth of oil. So we know that the wise virgins had oil and the foolish ones did not. And the whole purpose, the celebration around Hanukkah, is the rededication of the temple after it was soiled with Antiochus's abomination. So Hanukkah is a celebration of dedicating the temple, and we know that Paul tells the New Testament Christians, he says, "Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you?" So if you can read into what's going on here, lights, oil, temple, could Hanukkah be a foreshadow of the end time servants who are going to rise and shine, the wise virgins who are going to have the oil, and the fact that these New Testament Christians, they are themselves God's temple, that maybe they will be rededicated during the time of Hanukkah. So let's jump backwards a few hundred years. So Hanukkah, the event occurred in 168 BC, but about 400 years before that, the prophet Haggai, he spoke about the temple's foundation being rebuilt, because the temple was destroyed in 500 or 600 BC, and when the Jews went off to exile for 70 years, they came back. And during the time of Haggai, they rebuilt the temple. It was rebuilt. And it goes like this. So the prophet in chapter 2 talks about a time in the 9th month. It goes like this. It says, Haggai 2 verse 18 says, "Considered from this day onward, from the 24th day of the 9th month," which is the 24th of Kislev, "since the day that the foundation of the Lord's temple was laid, consider this, is the seed yet in the barn?" That's a euphemism. "Indeed, the wine, the fig tree, the pomegranate, and the olive tree have yielded nothing, but from this day I will bless you." Notice what he says here. It says, "From this day, the 24th day of the 9th month, which is the evening before Hanukkah begins." He says, "Is the seed in the barn?" Does Jesus talk about seed and wheat being in the barn in one of his harvesting parables? We'll see that in a minute. "The word of the Lord came a second time to Haggai on the 24th day of the 9th month. He says, I'm going to shake the heavens and the earth." So if we jump forward to the time of Jesus, he spoke about these seeds in the barn. And this is Jesus now speaking in Matthew. Okay? He was giving them a parable of the seeds and the weeds. Jesus said, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in the field. While his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away." So the wheat and the seeds essentially are the good thing. The wheat came from the good seed. "So when the plants came up and bore grain, the weeds also appeared, and the servants of the master of the house came to him and said, 'Master, do you know, did you not know Did you know that that the good seed in your field had weeds in it? Essentially, what he was saying. How then does the weeds grow? He said to him, "An enemy has done this." So the servant said to him, "Then do you want us to go out and gather them?" That would be gathered the good seed and the wheat. And Jesus says, "No, lest the gathering of the weeds you might root up the wheat along with them. Let them both grow together until the harvest at the end, at the harvest time. And I will tell the reapers to gather my weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but then gather the wheat into my barn." So Jesus makes a reference to the end time harvest, where there have been weeds sown into the good seeds, and that the weeds will be gathered and burned, but then he will gather the wheat into my barn, which makes a definite reference to Haggai on this 24th day of the 9th month. And it says, "Is the seed yet in the barn?" So Haggai verse 18 or 19 and Jesus in Matthew 13 verse 30 really are talking about the same event. But Haggai gives us the timing. And we don't know what year, but it surely appears the time of the year. And what's interesting about this Haggai verse 18 is the 24th day of the 9th month is the day before Hanukkah begins. Festival of Lights. It's the same timing. So we can tie all these loose ends together and come to a conclusion here in a little bit. So then he goes on to say, he goes and gives a description of this parable. He says this, says, "Then left the crowds and went into his house, and the disciples came to him and said, 'Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field.' And he answered, 'The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seed is the sons of the kingdom, and the weeds are the sons of the evil one.' Then he says, 'Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father.'" So let's go backwards a little bit and see what actually Jesus says about this 4 months, because he gives us more information. Jesus says, "Look, I tell you, lift up your eyes." This is the 4 months before the first fruits harvest. "Lift your eyes up and see that the fields are white." That word white in the Hebrew means this. It means lukos. It means bright, shining, bright, brilliant. And that is a word that's used for angels. So we know it speaks about how the 144,000 are going to rise and shine. This is that word. See that the fields are white, brilliant light, shining like angels do for the harvest. He says already, the one who reaps is receiving his wages and gathering fruit for eternal. So by the time this event begins, the harvest workers are already working, so that the sower, would be Jesus, and the reaper, the harvest workers, may rejoice together. For here is a saying that holds true: one who sows and another reaps. I sent you, the followers of Jesus, to reap that for which you did not labor. Others have labored, and you have entered into your labor. And who are the laborers into the harvest? I've talked about this many times, guys. Luke 10 tells us that. He says this in Luke chapter 10. Jesus makes the declaration. He says, "After this, the Lord appointed 72 or 70 pairs or 72 pairs, which is 144. The Greek's a little bit iffy on really what it says on the quantity. Others and his disciples, and sent them on ahead of him, 2 by 2, into every town and place where Jesus was about to go. These are the forerunners, the John the Baptist, the prophets that are going to go herald the coming of the Lord at the second time. And he said to them, the harvest is plentiful and the laborers are few. Therefore pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out his laborers into the harvest." So we learn about these laborers. These are the few. And Jesus says also in Matthew 24 that many are called, but few are chosen. And that the gate is narrow and the way that is hard that leads to light. But those who find this narrow gate are the few. That would be the few that are going to go through the narrow gate to receive their training, which you can read about in Psalm 144. So the harvest workers are these chosen few who enter by the narrow gate, and they will begin harvesting, it would appear to be at the time of Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights. This appears to be the time to rise and shine. But you might say, well, Hanukkah's already occurred, right? Well, let's just look at it again. Let's look at some of the calendars. Look, I don't know the day or the hour. So look here. Essentially, according to the words of Jesus, the harvest at the end of the age is 4 months before the established harvest cycle in Israel. That seemed to be exactly what Jesus is talking about. So let's look at the standard Jewish calendar for 2019, when the first fruits harvest is. On the Gregorian calendar, it's April 21st. That's basically what people call Easter or Resurrection Sunday. So subtract 4 months, it's December 21st. If you look at the Jewish lunar calendar, the Jews of today, they celebrate the Feast of, well, they don't actually celebrate the Feast of First Fruits. They recognize it, but they just basically ignore it, because the sages way back when realized that Jesus indeed was the first fruit, so they've hidden it. The modern day Jews ignore the Feast of First Fruits, essentially, but they do recognize it on Nisan 16, which is April 21st, and you subtract 4 months, it lands on December 24. Now there's an extra month, Adar, added in the beginning of 2019. So here we have, just looking at the words of Jesus using the standard calendars, we can see that somewhere around December 21st, December 24th would be the timing that Jesus said when the fields would be ripe, white, brilliant white, ready for harvesting. That lies outside of the December 3rd to December 10th timing for Hanukkah on the standard calendars. Well, let's look at something I found pretty interesting. If we look at Enoch's calendar, which is a little different, they recognize the Essenes, and Nick Vanderland speaks about this. The Essenes recognize the Feast of First Fruits on the 26th day of Nisan, which happens to be April 15th, right here. And if we subtract 4 months from April 15th, or the 26th day of Nisan, it lands on December 13th, or the 26th day of Kislev of the 9th month. And what's odd about this is that is in Hanukkah, because Hanukkah is the 25th day down to the 2nd day of the 10th month. This is the period of Hanukkah, and on Enoch's calendar, it aligns. On Enoch's calendar, the Feast of First Fruits, subtract 4 months, is in Hanukkah, which puts it on December 13th. Look, still don't know the day of the hour. I'm just taking the clues that Jesus gives us. That's all I'm doing. So take your pick on the calendar which you want to follow. This is my theory. It's only my theory only, is that those who will be translated in for training, those, because Enoch was translated, my thought are that group is going to follow Enoch's calendar. Other groups, those who follow the traditional calendars, like maybe the regular Jews, their timing could be December 21st or the 24th. So it's, no one knows the day of the hour. Here we are, December 9th. If this is going to be the year, if this is the year of the Lord's return, then surely, based upon the clues given to us from Jesus, the time is ripe, white. Now we know in Amos it says this. It says, this is what the sovereign, Amos chapter 8, this is what the sovereign Lord says, show me a basket of ripe fruit. What do you see, Amos? He says, a basket of ripe fruit. Then the Lord said to me, the time is ripe for my people Israel. That would be the Christians and Jews, the whole house. I will spare them no longer. In that day, declares the Lord, the songs of the temples, the churches, will turn to wailing, many dead bodies flung everywhere. This has not yet been fulfilled. It will be soon, when the time is ripe. And as Jesus says, according to him, that when the first fruits harvest is ready to be celebrated, that his end time harvest will occur. That's the timing that he's given us. So with that, guys, I don't have any more. No one knows the day of the hour. I'm just using the clues of Jesus and taking those clues and trying to make something up, to study these clues, because a lot of people just ignore this stuff. Not us, guys. With that, have a great day, and God bless you.